Добрый день, я рад вас приветствовать на нашем YouTube-канале TALAP.Talks. И сегодня мы поговорим об очень специфической, но вместе с тем невероятно интересной истории, которая происходит на наших глазах. Это выборы в Бундестаг в Германии. Сегодня у нас в гостях Кристоф Мор, руководитель фонда Ф.Эберта в Казахстане и Узбекистане. Это политический фонд, который тенденциозен, он partisan, принадлежит победившей политической партии, социал-демократической партии Германии, которая набрала на этих выборах 25,7% голосов, опередив партию, которая всегда ассоциировалась в последнее время с Ангелой Меркель, которая набрала только 24,1% голосов. Идет невероятно интересный процесс формирования коалиции. И почему это интересно казахстанцам? В первую очередь, потому что Германия является безусловным, наверное, лидером и трендсеттером в европейской политике. Вместе с тем Европейский Союз, Европа очень важный игрок, который сейчас лидирует даже по сравнению с Соединенными Штатами Америки, с Китаем, с другими центрами сил, сейчас лидирует в том, какое регулирование и какую повестку, в том числе климатическую, мир должен осознать и должен на нее отреагировать. И в многом именно от канцлера Германии, от правительства Германии, той коалиции, которая сложится, будет зависеть мировая политика, не побоюсь этого слова. Кристоф, many thanks for your time. So really interesting for our Kazakhstani audience, and we would like to increase the understanding of the German politics. And I just explained in Russian why it's important for Kazakhstani to watch and to follow the German politics. So please tell us about these elections and the results and the coalition.
Thank you, Rakim. Nice to be here. Good to share this opinion. And as you said in your intro, I'm biased in this capacity. I'm the representative of an organization that is linked to the Social Democratic Party. So I'm not fully objective here. That's why you see me a little smiley, because my party, the Social Democratic Party, won the election. And just a couple of months ago, that seemed to be impossible even. We were polling between 14 and 16%.
You didn't expect these
results?
No.
I mean, we hoped for it certainly, but we came from a position of 14 to 16%, which historically, and I mean, the Social Democratic Party is more than 150 years old. It's the oldest party of Germany. So with this rich tradition, we never ever polled around 14 to 16%. So we were at rock bottom, to be honest here. And we didn't see that there's an actual path of winning the upcoming election when we announced more than a year ago that Olaf Scholz will be our candidate. Sure, he said it, and he sort of had this unbelievable force and willpower, and he was super vocal about that he will actually win this election. But I wouldn't say that nobody believed this, but it was under big questions if we actually have a path of winning the election. And then a couple of weeks ago, that actually happened, and we went from 14% in one of the polls to 25.7%. So we increased by 10%, which again is a great success, and for us a very, very good surprise, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, tell us about the agenda and about what main topics, what was this battle, this struggle between parties.
The first is, it is the first election in which the incumbent, the sitting chancellor, is not vying for re-election. That never happened in German history so far. So when Angela Merkel announced that she's not running for re-election after 16 years in office, that came not as a surprise, certainly, but it never happened before.
So there is no limits in the legislation?
No, there is no term limit. She was in office, or she is still acting chancellor for 16 years now. Mm-hmm. And against this backdrop, she was announcing that she's going to step down and resign. And that happened, that basically created a vacuum on the conservative side. At this point, nobody was named to be her natural successor. She came up with a candidate that was Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, that's the German Minister of Defense. She was the natural person to succeed Angela Merkel. She was briefly the head of the Conservative Party, but then resigned later when she didn't see to have enough support. Meaning that this is the first time in history of Germany that the acting party that is in power, the acting chancellor, is not running for re-election. That's the first here. The second one is that for the first time in German history, there were 3 candidates vying to become chancellor of Germany. Traditionally, it's only that the Conservative Party and the Social Democratic Party nominate somebody to be the chancellor. The chancellor is in Germany not directly elected, but only elected by the German parliament, by the majority of the German parliament. But still, the 2 major parties traditionally announce whom they intend to nominate to become chancellor. The Conservatives did that later on. First party to did it was my party, the Social Democratic Party. But, and that's the second first, the Greens also announced a candidate, which was Annalena Baerbock. She was the first candidate ever from a Green party to vie for election of the chancellor.
And I saw some focus that some experts predicted she could win.
At a certain point in time, that was true. They topped the polling at a certain point, even having more percent as the conservative side. But then I'll explain later, this changed dramatically. But this is the second first I wanted to name. The third one is that it was to be expected for the first time in history of the Republic that there will be a coalition of 3 parties and not 2, which we never had so far. So other European countries such as Italy, they mostly have coalitions out of 5, 6 parties. In Germany, that had never happened before. It was only 2 parties so far. So it was either the Social Democrats and the Greens, or the Conservatives and the Liberals, or a grand coalition, which we had for the last 4 years, the Conservatives and the Social Democrats. But besides these options, we never had a government. We had Social Democrats and Liberals once in the past, but we never had a government formed out of 3 parties in a coalition. So that are the 3 firsts that basically were drawing the backdrop against which this election has been taking place.
And talking about the main topic of the political discussion.
Obviously, the most and strongest question in the beginning was, who will succeed Angela Merkel? Again, we never had this scenario before, that the incumbent is not running. And Merkel was in power for 16 years. She's the second longest serving chancellor. So this question, who will succeed her, and the whole system of Angela Merkel. Let me briefly describe the system. Angela Merkel is a very moderating chancellor, meaning that she always listens to the electorate, what is the opinion, and she's one that is very good in keeping status quo, in keeping a certain way of governance, and also in managing crises. She had 3 major crises, as you're well aware. The most recent one is obviously the pandemic. There was the global financial crisis, 2008, 2009, and 2015, there was the big migration crisis in Europe. So she had 3 major crises, and besides that, she was very, very moderating and keeping status quo within German society. And this was basically her modus operandi, how to govern Germany for 16 years. And obviously, this informed the biggest question, which is really who will succeed her and what style of governing will come with this person. That was question number 1. Then there were major topics besides the question who will succeed in the chancellery. That is first and foremost climate change. We had a strong movement within Germany, mostly driven by youth, Friday for Futures. They sort of put climate change on the top of the agenda. It always has been, not always, but for a longer time has been a question in Germany how climate change policies look like. But the urgency, how this was brought up in the ladder of priority in the discourse, changed dramatically when many, many, many young people roamed the streets every Friday to protest against climate change policies in Germany. You would think so, but I mean, this was an election that was heavily focused on the candidates, right? Mm-hmm. And there, how you're perceived, how you frame your competence in the public discourse matters. And Armin Laschet didn't create the most competent picture of his in this case. So did Annalena Baerbock, the candidate of the Green Party. She also in her campaign made some mistakes that might seem to an outsider minor. She had published a CV of hers that had some mistakes in it. Again, it seems to be minor, but it painted a picture of somebody that is just not there yet to lead our country politically. And Annalena Baerbock always has this, people were saying that she's meticulous in her work. She's always asking the most informed question, always goes into the details, reads everything. But then she publishes twice a CV that has mistakes in it. That, against this backdrop, it just painted a picture of somebody that is not there yet. She's just 40 years of age. She never hold, a government office, certainly not a high-ranking one. So lack of experience was one of the critiques many people presented to her. And then she publishes a CV twice that has mistakes in it. That didn't resonate well with the public. And Olaf Scholz, the Social Democratic candidate, on the other hand, didn't do any of those mistakes. He ran a campaign that was focused on his topics, on him as being an experienced leader. He's currently the Minister of Finance within the Merkel government and the Vice Chancellor. He has been a mayor to one of the major cities in Germany. So he's an experienced politician, and he played that card. And by doing this, he naturally framed himself to be the successor to Angela Merkel.
What is the current situation building coalition?
Right. Currently, after the election, the result was basically that there were only three real options. Three real options means they could either prolong the Grand Coalition in switched roles. Mm-hmm. So that would be Social Democratic Party leading government, with the junior partner being the conservative side. This would be the opposite of what we have now. But none of the parties and nobody in the public wanted that option. So this option was out of the realm of possible quite soon. So there were only two options that actually made sense, and that is what we're doing right now, having coalition talks on what we call the traffic light coalition, which is the Social Democratic Party, the Green Party, and the Liberals, because these have the colors of a traffic light, mm-hmm. right? These parties currently are in coalition talks. The results will be released soon, and firmly believe that this will lead to a new government. The only other option that was on the table was basically the Greens and the Liberals, but not with the Social Democrats, even though we won the election, but with the conservative side. But as the Conservatives lost, I would say, a historic loss in this election, they didn't present a picture of being government ready. And Armin Laschet, his campaign was of course not successful, so he's not in a position to become chancellor. For a brief moment, that seemed to be a viable option. But now with the coalition talks of the traffic light coalition already underway, I would argue they're almost to conclude. This seems to be very, very unlikely. So right now what happened is, in two stages, these coalition talks are done. The first stage was essentially on an exploring level, in which the leaders of the party discussed some major topics, trying to find out if this can actually even work. Mm-hmm. This was done and concluded successfully 3 weeks ago, and then they announced, we are ready to engage in formal coalition talks. And these formal coalition talks, they have separate working groups, more than 20. And in those working groups, they sort of try to identify the topics that will be the priority for the next government, and also find a compromise on which you can actually govern. And this is currently happening. Yesterday at 6 p.m. German time, all of the working groups were scheduled to submit the results. None of this obviously has been made public. And now the leadership, the senior leadership of all the respective parties, the three parties, are engaging in the final rounds of discussions based on the results of the working groups to ultimately then announce if this has been successfully concluded. The parliament already is in power, meaning that the newly elected members of parliament already are in the new parliament, while the old government is still as a caretaker government in power. So Angela Merkel is still the Chancellor of Germany, but the new coalition is set for the 6th of December to then ultimately, by the power of the newly elected parliament, vote for a new chancellor, which will hopefully be Olaf Scholz, our candidate. And then if he assumes office, then ultimately the new government will.
So, and when do you expect to have a new government and new chancellor? Until the end of the year?
No, earlier. I mean, they're set to do this 6th of December.
6th of December. Okay.
Could take a little longer. This is a bit disputed right now. There are certain opinions that say it might take a little longer. But I mean, best to my knowledge, I think in the first week of December, we will have a new chancellor and a new government.
So, Social Democrats, your party, gained more than 3 times seats in the Bundestag than it was before, as I understand.
I mean, I'm not sure if it's 3 times, but I believe more than 60 newly elected members of government.
53, yes, according to the Wikipedia.
Right.
Okay. And conservatives, so now they have, like, also it's a big loss for them.
Historic
loss. So, and what does it mean for the Germany's policy agenda? Let's start from the internal policy and then external foreign policy.
Well, let's start with domestic, with internal perspective. And I mean, I started this by saying Angela Merkel's way of doing politics was very much in the status quo. Not saying that nothing happened in the 16 years. That wouldn't be true, and it would be a lie and damaging her legacy. That's not true, but she was, again, a moderating chancellor that didn't do the big reforms. But now in 2021 and so forth, Germany as a country and the European Union sees the need for substantial reform. So the new government has the gigantic task of tackling most of the crucial issues coming from the global stage. And I already named that one to be top priority on the agenda is climate change. Germany, as Kazakhstan and other countries, signed the Paris Accord and takes this very seriously. But current estimates say that the transformation of the German economy to net zero is not to be achieved, and right now we're not projected to fulfill our obligations under the Paris Accord as we so much hope. So the next government will need to tackle this challenge and facilitate a change from our very much carbon-heavy, industry-heavy economy to a greener, more sustainable and high-technology economy that to some extent makes that transition socially just, but also is mindful of the need of innovation and modernization. And that's the grand theme of the next coalition: modernization, digitalization, and innovation. All under the big umbrella of the need of climate change adaptation and mitigation.
What kind of the first step do you expect from this Bundestag?
That's a good question. It depends really on the perspective. If we again start domestically, Olaf Scholz has announced that he will raise minimum wage within the first year. I expect that to happen. Right now, minimum wage is at €9 something, but he promised, and that was one of his major policies that he announced during his campaign, that he will indeed raise that to €12, which would be much closer to a living wage within Germany. So that's one thing that will absolutely happen. Another arena that is absolutely crucial in German politics these days is the question on housing. Housing tends to be rather unattainable these days. Many people struggle under the heavy price increases in the last decades in Germany, both sides, if you're renting or if you're buying. So this will be a major question. Olaf Scholz again announced that he will build 400,000 apartments per year to sort of increase the housing market and therefore reduce prices substantially. So that's certainly one thing. Then climate change policies I'm not sure how they will look like in the first year and the first 2 years, but they will certainly be a priority. Then there's the big question. The Liberal Party ran on a platform saying, with us, there will be no increase in taxation. And the big question, obviously, is if you sort of set the goal of, getting to a new form of development, a greener, sustainable economy, socio-ecological transformation, who's paying the bill in the end? If you announce we will not raise taxes, how do you sort of allocate money within the existing budget in a way that this transition, modernization, innovation is even possible? So that is the big question. How that will actually translate into the government acting is not clear at this point, because all three parties sort of were very much holding back information how the coalition talks were actually going, if there's any results. So it's not clear how exactly the agenda will look like. They released one paper on the first level of discussions they had. In German, it's Sondierungspapier. That's basically describing, again, the first level of conversations. But it only maps out visions and ideas without being too concrete on the steps that need to be taken in order to get there. So it's right now not very much clear what will be the priority in the first, let's say, 1 or 2 years.
What about foreign policy?
Well, there's one saying, I'm a political scientist and economist, and there's one saying you learn right away at the university when talking about German foreign policies. We love consistency. Sure, there will be some changes even in this arena, but I would argue German foreign policy over the last, 70 decades is very much driven by consistency. The European Union as an arena will play a bigger role even in the future. It has to be. Germany knows, the German government knows, all the parties, most parties share the notion that we're vital part of the European Union, but the European Union is a vital part of Germany also. So the need of deepening, strengthening, and engaging more in the European Union is shared by all major parties, and I assume that the new coalition will make this also a priority. But then again, I expect to see a lot of consistency in this arena.
Mm-hmm. What about relationship with the US?
Certainly much easier since Joe Biden took over the office of the president of the US. I believe that the partnership that traditionally has been very strong between Germany and the US will sort of see a revival. One could make the case that this already has been underway in the last year with Angela Merkel. But I think Germany will take a very good look towards Washington and vice versa. In the realm of climate change, this will be absolutely needed and crucial. And you could see sort of already that this is underway when Angela Merkel brought Olaf Scholz, her natural successor, to the G20 meeting just recently in Italy. Mm-hmm. But Olaf Scholz has been to the US just recently. He's very much engaged in conversations with the friends in Washington. So I believe he will also, besides strengthening and engaging more with the European, will also do the very same with Washington.
Do you expect that Germany will be close ally of US in Chinese coalition?
I mean, Germany, same as Kazakhstan. I wouldn't say that we naturally have a multifactorial policy. I'm not sure if this term fits perfectly to German foreign policy, but Germany obviously also works with Beijing. We have very, especially economic relationships to China. So I wouldn't say that Germany in any capacity sees itself in direct, how did you frame it? In direct fight or opposition to China. I would rather see our role in mitigating and finding middle ground and always seeking opportunities and being engaged with both partners that are, we're an exporting nation that is very crucial for our country.
Attitude relationship with Russia.
This is certainly not easy. Everybody that understands how the current relationship between the European Union, Germany and Russia looks like, big task. But I would go back in the history of social democracy. We have a very rich history in engaging with Russia, in partnering with Russia, in finding middle ground and opportunities to talk and find solutions. And I think that we have strong politicians in our ranks that will in the future help to find ways and channels to further strengthen the relationship we have with Russia.
And finally, so does your party have a special strategy or vision towards the Central Asian region?
I wouldn't say that the party itself has a vision for Central Asia. I would see this in a broader sense of German foreign policy. First, talking about Kazakhstan, and this already has been clear when President Tokayev went to Berlin to visit Angela Merkel. Kazakhstan is the natural partner, the biggest and the strongest economy in Central Asia, and therefore Germany's most prioritized country and partner within the region. I believe that will remain under the new chancellor. This is one, right? The region, Central Asia, naturally, and that I would even say doesn't relate to the new coalition. The region itself is getting more important for Europe.
Why?
Well, I don't have to explain you geopolitics and the role of Central Asia in between Russia, China, and the European Union, right? But Central Asia itself is a growing market. It's still a strongly developing region. It has geographically a very interesting role with the proximity to Afghanistan, but also to the neighboring country of China. Its historic and traditional ties to Russia. So obviously, from a European perspective, and especially from a German perspective, investing in the region, developing developing cooperation, strengthening existing ties is obviously a priority for us. Also, Kazakhstan and Germany have many, like on a personal level, many ties, so many families that come from either of our countries visiting each other. So I do expect this to be sort of the same with the new government. But again, right now it's not clear which priorities will be there for the new government. Right now it's not even clear who is to be the new foreign minister and from which party this individual will come from. As soon as the dust settles and we see a clear picture, then it is much easier to answer those questions on specific priorities. But I would always argue German foreign policy is very consistent and therefore this will very much stay the same.
Christoph, many thanks. Let me again congratulate you and your party with this historic success. And I hope that the relationship between Kazakhstan and Germany will go further into prosperity.
I'm certain of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.